All right. Nick, long time no see. How you been?
I'm good. Look, I think I saw you Friday, and then I saw Jay and Brenda Saturday, and here we are on Monday. I love it.
All right, good. We're really excited about this this presentation. Traveling around the country as I have, and being in touch with as many people as I have in as many places, this is a huge issue in the field, and we're really excited to welcome Dr. Casias, Brenda, Jay Stupin all along to be able to discuss what the solution that they've come up with in California. We're really excited about it. So I welcome you heartily, and I look forward to a good presentation and maybe some good discussion afterwards.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you. I'll just take a second. I'll introduce myself. My name is Brenda Naimy. I teach at Cal State LA in the O&M Specialist Preparation Program, and I teach some other courses for our Division of Special Ed. And prior to that, I was an O&M specialist. I think the majority of my work was with adults, but maybe about 20% working with school-age kids. Then I'll pass it to Jay to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jay Shupin. I'm an O&M specialist. I've been working in the system for 23 years, mostly with kids, a little bit with adults, and I live and work in Northern California near the Sacramento area.
Hi, I'm Nick Casias. I'm an O&M specialist, and for the past 3.5 years, I've got to work alongside some of my idols, including Dr. Diane Fozzie and Professor Brenda Naimy with the CSULA Orientation and Mobility Specialist Training Program as part of the faculty.
Aw, that's sweet. So a little bit of history, and I don't think it's unique to California. I don't remember what year I first started hearing about problems. I want to guess around 2010. Every now and then we'd be contacted by someone working in a school district who said, oh, you know, the administrator said we can't drive our students in the community. And, you know, we would at that point provide information, say, hey, here's, you know, how you might go about talking with your districts. And in some cases that was, you know, pretty successful, and in others it just wasn't, which will give you a little bit more detail. But the problem that we've been seeing in Southern California and Northern California is that school districts had some serious concerns about O&M specialists driving students in their personal cars, you know, for instruction in the community. And the reasoning behind that varied a little bit, but often it was just, you know, that vague liability. You know, they were worried about what would happen if there was an accident. Some districts were worried about just an O&M specialist being alone in a car with the student. So, you know, there was a handful of concerns. And the problem is that, you know, we understand we don't have a right to drive students, but our students do have the right to instruction in the community, and school districts are responsible for providing transportation. All right, so in a lot of cases, they were just saying, no, you can't drive, and they weren't providing alternative transportation options in several cases. So other concerns that came out is that districts were limiting instruction to just school hours. And in O&M, if you've tried to schedule, you know, it's a competitive sport trying to find a time slot to get O&M instruction with your students, because you're competing with all the core instructional areas, which everyone, you know, considers it a priority. And then you're left with, you know, these little brief periods of time during the school hours. Other reasons, you know, some O&Ms like to work just before or just after school hours is that so they can have a little bit more flexibility in terms of providing instruction if there's driving involved, or they want to do bus travel. So, you know, that was an issue. Home visits and home instruction, we were hearing that some districts weren't allowing that, you know, citing different concerns. And we heard some districts were even going so far as having the O&M specialists change IEP goals. So to eliminate any goals that provide, said, yeah, we should have instruction in community settings. So this is what we were dealing with in Southern Cal, and then we were, at some point I was talking with Jay, and they were dealing with similar issues in Northern California. So this is kind of what got us together. I think Jay and I probably started talking, I want to say 2015. Jay, you can correct me if that's wrong. But by that point, we've been dealing with problems for years. So these steps that I've identified on this slide, these were the steps that, our committee, we developed a committee, we called it the FAPE Committee, Free Appropriate Public Education. And this committee was housed under our state organization, the California Association of Orientation and Mobility Specialists. So we established this committee to examine the problems we were experiencing and to come up with some solutions. And, in the long run, we ultimately kind of came up with like 9 big steps that we took, and we put them in an order that may or may not be logical depending on exactly the experience that you're having, but this is pretty much the approach that we had. And a lot of this is developed over retrospect and things we tried that worked, and in some cases, and things we tried in other cases that didn't work. And you can get a lot of detail if you read our article that's in the JVIB in the August 2022 edition. So you'll get a lot more detail than what we'll have time probably to cover today. But whenever someone approaches us, our first advice or question is what kind of discussions have you had with your school administrators? We hear them out, and then we always suggest, try educative approaches first. And we have heavily emphasized educating administrators on the legal, basically their legal obligations and our students' rights in terms of instruction in the community. And there's just sort of a set of resources that we've been providing to a lot of people that could be enhanced, but we heavily emphasize the legal things. So for example, federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, very explicit. You read section 300.34 and it says O&M instruction should take place in the school, the home, and community environments. It's very clear. It describes what O&M is, but it very clearly indicates that O&M should take place in community environments. It also identifies transportation as a related service. So if students need transportation in order to benefit from their special education or O&M, then that too is mandated by IDEA. So we have strong legal foundation for O&M instruction taking place in the community. We have strong policy. The Federal Register, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of like the federal government's daily newsletter, or their official journal. Basically, it provides guidance in, on policy and guidance on law, because, these massive education laws and other laws are written, and sometimes there's need for interpretation and feedback from the government. So the Federal Register in, I want to say 2000, I've got a link to it so you can get the specific date. The Federal Register wrote a very detailed policy guidance memo or article on services for the education of blind and visually impaired students. And in significant detail, it talked about orientation and mobility instruction and reiterated the need for O&M instruction to take place in school, home, and community environments. It also boosts a lot of other things. So if you're having other issues with your school administrators, it talked about the need for instruction as early as possible, because it takes years to develop these skills. And it talks about how O&M services is very important, and it impacts their success, our students' success in school, but not only just in participating in school and off school, related school activities, but also after school. Their opportunities to obtain employment, or their opportunities to retain their employment or be successful in employment. So it's a really supportive document that explicitly states this is how the law should be interpreted in providing services. So these are things that, you know, the kinds of documents we were providing people who would reach out to us. California also has very detailed program guidelines for serving students with visual impairments. Our education code requires that these guidelines are developed and distributed. And in fact, we're in the process of updating them now. Our most recent set are from 2014. But these guidelines in California also explicitly state that O&M instruction should be taking place in school and home and community environments. So that was just another piece of really useful, documentation that we thought O&M specialists could share with their administrators and, you know, say, hey, there's a real need. We also gave out things like AER has a position paper on O&M in naturalistic environments. So it really talked about the importance of, you know, why kids with visual impairment need instruction in a variety of familiar and unfamiliar environments. So we wanted to arm people with educative resources so that they could talk to their administrators. I had a lengthy talk, this is just by the way, with Bill Kohler, who kind of said, and here's some other information that you could provide relating to school age standards for O&M and kids. So I think there's even more that we can build on with that. And so that's kind of where we started. If and when, and in some cases, I'm happy to say that O&M's reported back like, yes, it's worked. But in other cases, it did not. Then we would talk about, in some of those cases, using existing complaint procedures. And every state, every school district has existing complaint procedures. It's built into federal law, and the federal law says you've got to have complaint procedures, you know, and appeal processes in place. Then your state law has to have it as well. So most likely your education code will parallel it. So you want to kind of find out exactly how to, you know, within your specific school district, how you might approach it. But there's kind of two general approaches for complaint procedures. If an instructor or anyone, you know, who has anything to do with schools, or any citizen can actually file in California what's called a uniform complaint. So any person can say, you know, file a complaint. They can just say, hey, you know, services to kids is not what it should be. And in fact, that is one thing that I did with a very large school district in Los Angeles, because we heard from them initially in 2010. They weren't allowed to, you know, transport their students. The district didn't provide any alternatives. They tried everything they could to be educative. And they were basically told they had to change their IEP goals, and they if they had any kind of community instruction, and they also could no longer write goals, and they weren't allowed to talk to parents about these things. So I looked up the complaint procedures. I started at our California Department of Education, and they said, yeah, you go to the district site and anyone can file the complaint. So I was just so frustrated and so angry. I spent a Friday morning writing a really cranky letter. And in the letter, I just said, hey, this has been going on for 3 years. I identified the steps that the instructors tried to take to educate the administrators. I CC'd the administrators, I CC'd the superintendent of schools, and I listed the resources that we have been giving to O&M. And I was really clear. I said, hey, the administrators have been given all these resources. They know better. You know, they've been educated, nothing's happened. So with that complaint process, which really was an easy thing to do, I just had to take the time and formulate my thoughts and add in, you know, the legal resources that I had been given. What happened next is it was acknowledged almost immediately. I wrote it, I was cranky, and I wrote it on a Friday morning. I got an acknowledgement Monday. And by the following week, I was contacted by an attorney, a district attorney. And she interviewed me, and I basically reiterated what was in the letter. And I said, hey, I've talked to all the O&Ms within this district. They've all reported it. They've all said they haven't been able to teach your student. And, and I just reiterated what I had said in the complaint. She went on to interview all the O&M and specialists. She interviewed their administrator as well. The administrator said, yeah, she said she agreed. She knows it's a problem. It was people higher than her, risk management people who said, they can't drive. So, we were at that point, the attorney wrote kind of a lengthy letter acknowledging, and she said, yes, it is absolutely a violation of the student's free and appropriate public education. She outlined all the legal references, which looked a lot like the legal references I had provided, and said, yes, the county is required to provide transportation. So we were all excited, happy days. That was in maybe 2016 or 17. They're still not allowing transportation. So I would say not a happy ending in that particular case, but I think it might work in others. So we want people to be aware of it. So that's one kind of complaint. Maybe even more effective, though, are the kind of complaint procedures built in for parents. And there's two general types, and these exist within any state. One is generally considered a compliance complaint. A parent could use this kind of complaint procedure if their child has an IEP that says they should be getting O&M in the community, but they aren't. And then in that case, they're basically filing a complaint that says, hey, this is in my child's IEP, the district isn't doing it, and it really is relating to compliance. An alternative type of complaint relates more to due process. This might occur in the case where a parent wants their child to have O&M instruction in the community, but the district is not allowing it. In this case, they can go through due process steps. And there's a variety of steps that are built into the process. Parents might want to try an informal approach where they're just not agreeing with the IEP and they're asking to meet again, and they try an educative approach. They might bring an advocate in. They might choose to have an outside evaluation that says, hey, their kid needs to have O&M instruction in the community, and pressure the district in that way. If that doesn't work, they might seek out mediation. And this is where, an impartial person, typically appointed by the Department of Ed, will meet with both. And this person should be knowledgeable in the law, hear both sides, and try to come to an agreement. And if that doesn't work, a due process hearing is an option. And this is a really, serious. I mean, attorneys are often involved in the process, and a judge-like person will actually make a ruling that the family and the district will be held to. So, there are existing complaint procedures, and these are things that we may need to be letting people know about if these educative approaches don't work. There's more I could talk about, but I want to move on because I'm going on too long. We thought it was really important, our FAPE committee, to really get a sense as best we could, what is the scope of the problem? Like, how many O&M specialists within the state are dealing with? And are there other sort of related problems we should be aware of? So we did that by survey. It was a pretty straightforward survey. I think we had 6 questions. We were asking like, hey, is transporting students in the community a problem for you? If so, can you identify some of the issues? And we got 64 O&M specialists to respond, not a huge number, but they represented 53 different school districts. And we thought that was a pretty good sampling, within the state. Of those responses, 39% said, yes, administrative policies were making it difficult for them to provide transportation in the community. A lot of those folks also said they weren't able to, work with parents. They also said we can't work outside, typical school hours. So we got a little bit more depth and detail relating to the kinds of problems. We asked, hey, if you're not allowed to drive your student, were alternative transportation options being provided? And in some cases, yes, some districts, some O&Ms were allowed to use district vehicles. I think in one occasion, and I heard another one on Saturday at our CAMS conference, their district had the school bus drivers who were not in service at the time actually pick them up and drive them to their O&M lessons. So in most cases, some were actually allowing Uber and Lyft, rideshare options. So there were a variety of alternative options, most of which were not the most desirable. They had restrictions. I'd say probably one of the best alternatives were the cases where people were allowed to drive a district vehicle. But that didn't happen at all. So, at that point, after the survey, we realized, okay, this is a big problem. It was even larger than we were aware of. We were able to pinpoint some specific districts where the O&Ms felt comfortable sharing with us, what district specifically, and we were able to reach out to some people to, provide them with more information on how they might go about dealing with this. At this point, our FAPE committee had been gathering resources. And we were really kind of thinking about the kinds of resources, that we really needed in order to kind of cope with the problem we were dealing with. So one, personnel. We were reaching out to any O&M specialists who were kind of interested in working with us. Right from the get-go, we were really lucky to have an attorney volunteer her time. She sat in on our earliest phone calls starting in 2015 and, to give us advice. And the interesting thing, when you have an attorney on your committee, attorneys kind of think, yeah, you know what, let's get parents involved and let's sue. That's how they want a lawsuit and they want to set a legal precedent. And that kind of steered our committee a little bit. I'll let Jay talk about that a little bit more for a little while. So we were looking at personnel. We were looking at organizations that could help us, and really between CAOMS, our statewide O&M association, and the California Council of the Blind, when they partnered with us, we would say those were our two strong, organization approaches. And when we got support from the California Council for the Blind, that really steered us in a different direction. It was really, really helpful to us. So we had legislative support. Jeff Tom was their legal analyst and advocate, and he'd had years and years of developing legal bills, to pass legislation benefiting individuals with visual impairment. So once he joined our committee, it really took us in a different direction. So that was awesome. We also reached out to our statewide parent organization of kids with visual impairment, because we were hoping to recruit parents that might, join our efforts. And a handful of other associations and organizations and private agencies supported us in this process. So I can't emphasize enough, reach out to anybody that you think has a stake in this. So that's anybody who, organizations that are made up of people with visual impairment, or parents of people with visual impairments, or agencies and organizations with professionals or serving people with visual impairment, reach out. And almost everybody we reached out to wanted to provide support. So, really overwhelmingly positive. So more to say, but I've got to pass it to Jay because I know I've gone on too long already.
All right, thanks. And I wanted to say a couple more things about some of the stuff that Brenda already said. When we're at step 4, gathering resources, we now have a comprehensive list of all the agencies that are serving blind and visually impaired people, and we have the email addresses of their directors, and so we're continually expanding resources. The resource we do not have, and it turns out that we haven't needed, is money. We've got no money at all. We've done all of this with no money, so take note of that. I also want to mention in step 2, using existing complaint procedures. Brenda talked about the uniform complaint procedure in California. That's what it's called in California, but every single state has its own complaint procedure. If you just Google your state Department of Education complaint procedure, it'll pop up and it'll tell you what to do. So let's see, I'm going on to considering possible options. So it says here procedural, professional, legal, and legislative. So in terms of procedural, a couple of things, and we kind of did a lot of this stuff simultaneously. Procedural, we did contact Department of Education special ed division, and we asked them, we told them that this was a problem, and we asked them, what can you guys do about it? And they did steer us to their own complaint procedure, but of course our ONMs were afraid to make complaints. And we did ask them if what they could do to enforce existing law, and it was kind of a dead end there. And we also wanted them to issue some regulations, California regulations for IDEA. That wasn't going anywhere either. And then in terms of professional, what I mean by professional options is the California Council for the Blind did issue a position paper on off-campus O&M, and it was beautiful. Jeff Tom wrote it. It was really lovely. And we have it, and we distribute it when needed, but it has no standing. It has no legal power. It has no legislative power, but it is really nice. And then in terms of the legal options, we tried to connect with parents through the parent organization, California, what is it, CAPV, California Association of Parents of Children with Vision Impairments, I think, something like that, visually impaired kids. And there are those in all different states. You all have them, but they themselves have trouble connecting with parents. The people there are parents. The people who run it are parents, and it's hard to get parent involvement. We presented at designed a presentation specifically for parents. We just couldn't get very many parents involved. So what we ended up doing was the legislative route. More than anything, from default, that was the only thing open to us. Plus, our advisor Jeff Tom told us, well, if you have a law, then you can pursue enforcement. That's a benefit of having a law. It's enforceable. It has teeth, and that turned out to be true and useful. And it also, the other thing about it is, if you show your supervisor, as an O&M specialist, you show your supervisor a copy of a law, that makes you really credible. And it shows what standard practice is and what's supposed to be. And it does specify best practices. So that would be really useful. In the beginning, the opening section of a law has a background, has kind of like, what's the justification for the law? And in our law, it does explain the importance of the ECC and the problems created when kids don't have access. So that's another benefit of the law. It really does help explain to people, to administrators and people in the community, why this issue is important. So step 6, we targeted our solution, which was kind of our default thing, the legislative action, while still continuing to think about the other stuff too, and pursuing other stuff when we had a chance, but really focusing our attention on legislation. And then step number 6, we developed an action plan. I think I had an outline of 2.5 pages, single spaced, of all the steps we took. And I went back and looked at it afterward. We passed everything, and like we got almost everything done from that action plan. It was really useful to have that planned out in advance. So it really did guide what we ended up doing, and it was very helpful. So then taking legislative action. So the key to that, as Brenda said, was Jeff Tom, who was our, I guess I would say, lobbyist. So he was the guy who knew how to write legislation. He knew people in the legislature. He knew the legislative process. So if you're going to do this, you need someone like Jeff Tom. And we got our Jeff Tom from California Council for the Blind. You might get yours from NFB. NFB was involved with our and supportive of our efforts too. And wherever you get one, you have to find someone like that. It's also useful. The lawyer was also very useful. The lawyer we used was a disability rights lawyer. So she has consulted at several steps along the way, and her specialization is in vision impairment. And she did review our draft as well of our legislation. So we drafted it. We met, Jeff led us through the process. we met with what do you call it, consultant to the Assembly Education Committee who gave us some ideas. And then he helped find a legislator, an assembly member willing to author the bill. That's what it's called. He wrote it, but he doesn't get credit. The legislator, the assemblywoman, is the on paper, the author of the bill. And then it goes through various votes in the House of the Assembly and in the Senate, and eventually got signed by the governor of the state. But at every step along the way, what we did as part of the action plan is we kept expanding our communication network and kept in touch with all the updates. And whenever there was a vote pending in any one of those stages of the process, we sent down an action alert to our entire network saying, please write to this person. And we provided a script, write to this person and let them know what your role is, what your interest is, and that you're supporting this. We also solicited letters of support from organizations, and we got overwhelming response from that. We were told later that they were pretty relatively inundated, considering we're such a low incidence population. So that's really critical. And the other really highlight of that whole process is we got to have one in-person hearing. And I think about 30, 40 people showed up to that hearing, which was overwhelmingly more than any other bill that was being heard at that time got. There were a whole bunch of bills being heard. And we had, 30, 40 people, including folks with guide dogs, folks with canes. And that's really critical, that you get people to show up when there is an in-person hearing. So we were really fortunate. We got everything passed at every stage along the process. We did have to make a compromise along the way. One of the things we wanted was a mandate for the ECC. And we heard that wasn't going to pass. And if we went ahead with that, then the whole thing would be killed. So we did compromise on that. So instead of that, we got language, ECC language into our bill, but it says that districts may provide ECC services, but it doesn't say they're required to. So let's see. So I'm over to step 8. We took our legislative action. We got everything through. And then our step 9 was informing. This, of course, happened the whole process. During the whole process, as I say, we kept people informed, but also we're still doing it. In fact, I just did a presentation over the weekend at our statewide O&M mobility conference on how to use the law we have within the context of your work as an O&M specialist. So we're still doing that. We're still providing support through Nick and Brenda, especially been very helpful with that, and keeping people informed about what their rights are. So that's I think I've covered that slide. Oh, I guess I would also say one of the main things we did in informing stakeholders is we wrote the article. The article that was in JVIB, and we're talking to you now. So as you can see, we're still doing this. It was passed in October 15th, 2019. It was White Cane Day. And that was a coincidence. That was a lovely coincidence. And we're still publicizing. So now it's Nick's turn, and Nick is going to give you details about this law.
So this is Nick. Hi, guys. So as Jay alluded to, it's not a mandate. So some of the language was far less, it wasn't explicit in the manner of a must. It was more of, you may consider the expanded core curriculum. Specifically, the LEAs may consider the expanded core curriculum when developing individualized education programs for people who is blind, has low vision, or is visually impaired. And I know Brenda and Jay can elaborate on this, but I just remember as we went through the process that to mandate seemed to equate to an expense that would have tanked the entire bill. And so this is one of the major, I guess, concessions that we had to offer up. And it was about at least getting the ECC on the books, setting a groundwork or a framework or a template we could build upon for future legislative action. And we were successful in that respect, that it's there in California Ed Code, and it can be referenced as such. Let's see, next slide. Another example of getting language that we wanted, and not being a mandate, but specifically that services outside of school hours are allowed, that when appropriate, to ensure that the people will receive adequate services. Those services may, it's a may, not a must, be provided before or after school hours, which some mobility specialists were taking advantage of, and now they have some support in their recommendations to do so. Let's see, next slide. Well, this is important. Here's a must. Evaluators must be appropriately certified. If an orientation mobility evaluation is determined to be needed for people who is blind, has low vision, or is visually impaired, it shall be conducted by a person who is appropriately certified as an orientation mobility specialist. At least in this instance, we can ensure that an O&M, and only an O&M, is the individual being tapped to conduct both the evaluation and the subsequent services that the evaluation recommends. Let's see, next slide. We got an opportunity to it was a form of remediation to address some of the restrictions or limitations that were being placed on both evaluation and services pertaining to O&M. So the travel environments and the conditions must be expansive. The orientation mobility evaluations shall occur in familiar and unfamiliar environments, varying lighting conditions, and home, school, and community as appropriate. This was an attempt to directly combat the fact that districts and administrators were limiting instruction and evaluations to occur only on campus, only in the adjacent community, or only walking distance from the school site. And so having this language on the books gives the support that an O&M specialist may need when they are met with
Did he freeze?
Yeah. Did we lose him?
He's frozen in time. I think he hit the key points. I think Jay and I would probably want to add that varying lighting conditions. Oh, sorry, Nick, you're back. You froze for a minute.
on my end. I never left. You let me know. I was just making sure that the varying lighting conditions, I thought, was a very clever way to ensure that the potential for night travel and instruction during night, which a lot of districts were saying could not occur. And I think the explicit statement of home, school, and community made it so that when districts were limiting or putting parameters on what could and couldn't occur, that this really opened up the doors for O&M specialists to advocate and ensure that they were getting the full spectrum of instruction. And so this was exciting here. Let's see, next slide. This was a key, this was here trying to address the limitation on O&Ms being able to transport students, that the local LEA prohibits an orientation mobility specialist from using their vehicles for transportation, that the local education agency shall provide without cost to the O&M specialist an equally effective transportation alternative for that purpose. I remember when the bill was being drafted and going through the legislative process, the hope was that they would see how an easy alternative would be Uber and Lyft, would be a company vehicle or a district vehicle. What I've learned is that's not been the interpretation or the remediation provided by the districts. As Brenda said, it's been a bus. It's a school bus. It's been a van that must be taken out from the motorcade I think this part has probably been met with, I think, the most resistance, and is still being, as I'm learning about legislation, being interpreted in a manner that is not what we intended based on the language that was placed in the bill. And maybe that's at the convenience of the districts, but I don't have insight into their thought process there. Anything you want to add to this specific slide, Jay or Brenda? Okay. Let's see, next slide. So again, limitations are to be prohibited except as specified in subdivision C. A LEA shall not impose any limitations that results in the preclusion or the limitation of the ability of a pupil to receive instruction in O&M services in the home, school, or community setting and in varied lighting conditions as designated in the pupil's individualized education program and provided for pursuant to the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now, I think Brenda, at some point, I remember you kind of encapsulating the fact that what AB 947 did was not bring about new legislation, in the sense that it was already on the books at the federal level, that we were just kind of developing an alignment between California Ed Code and IDEA, because O&M specialists and individuals had already been bringing to the attention of their districts here in California that they were out of compliance because it was there in IDEA. However, we thought it would bolster that argument by also having it in a more provincial or regional nature and having it on California Ed Code as well. But it wasn't anything new. It was.
Oh, it is.
Well, yeah, the community instruction piece had solid federal, grounding, but we did sneak in quite a few things that were not. And it was like, oh, well, while we're at it, why don't we try these things that are not in there? So the things about the varying lighting conditions, we don't have solid federal background for that. So that was good. And outside of school hours, we don't have federal support for that. So we actually snuck in a handful of things in addition. So we started off with this transportation issue, and then when we did our survey, and of course Jay's experience, we recognized there's sort of close related issues, so we tried to address those as well. So I would say those pieces are pretty unique, and we didn't really have any support for those before.
And I also wanted to say we based our law, and we got a lot of support from the Texas people. Texas state law has an excellent education code regarding services for kids with vision impairments. I would say it's the most comprehensive in the country, quite a bit more comprehensive than ours. So they're the people who suggested the terminology varying lighting conditions, basically as a euphemism for night lessons. That's what it is. And we got that from our Texas friends, our friends in Texas. So I guess this is my slide now, our follow-up. So starting in, the law went into effect January 1st, 2020, and we, informed the heck out of people. We did want to start work immediately on the ECC mandate, but the education committee wasn't conducive. The members of the education committee were not conducive at the time, so we decided to wait a year. We introduced it in the next year, 2021, and it was immediately shot down by the chair of the Assembly Education Committee. 2022, that's this year, we've been reconsidering it, and what we were trying to link it to workload issues, because in doing further surveying of our community, including TVIs, we did get some blowback from people who were concerned about the extra work that they thought it would entail. And they're already overwhelmed. So many people are already overwhelmed because of the shortage of O&Ms and TVIs. So we did try to link together a workload analysis mandate with the idea to have a tool to make sure that they could show administrators that they were overworked, so that we could get more people hired, or at least get a recognition there was a need to hire new people. So at this point, this is just brand new within the last month. We've decided to hold off on that because we feel like it's going to be very controversial. We've talked to a couple of our consultants in the legislature, including the assembly member who carried our last bill, and including the consultant to the Assembly Education Committee, who felt that the new law that we were drafting was not going to fly at all. And so we need a lot more research to be able to show the need. So what we're trying to do now is write a bill requiring the state of California to study the issue, to study who are our visually impaired population, how much of the ECC are they getting, and what's the status of staffing to provide that instruction. So we're working on that right now. And we already talked about the ongoing support that we provide to O&M specialists who are calling and emailing us with issues. We give them lists of reference and resources, presentation materials. We offer to write a letter on their behalf. We happen to have in California, the California Association of O&M Specialists, a statewide agency with North and South branches. And we highly recommend, if your area doesn't have a professional organization, to start one and to partner with neighboring states to do maybe a regional thing, an organization that would be kind of like a good starting point or a vehicle to launch an effort to pass legislation, if that's what you're going to do, but at least to address the issue. We're going to put more materials on our website. And so we did it, not because we're special, just because we wanted to do it. We tried to do it so we could do it. You can do it too. And our goal, and the reason why we're here today, is we want to inspire every single state to do something like this, so that every kid with vision impairment in the country will have full access to community-based O&M instruction according to individual need. So following, there's some slides with some resources. Let's see what we have. There's a whole bunch of resources and links about the laws, the education codes, and what else do we have?
So yeah, we just basically broke them up into educative resources, like things that you might want to present to your administrator, or you might want to use in developing your own bill if you have to go that route, and how you might go about, if needed, filing a complaint. And that is the end of our slideshow.
And we'd love to see if you have any questions.
There are a couple of questions in the chat from Donna. Donna, you can unmute and explain your question more, but can you please repeat what the issue/topic of the latest legislative effort is? And then she said, thanks, and this is nothing short of awesome, the bill you got passed, I mean. So Donna, are you unmuted? Can you explain your question?
Yeah, I think we did address what our new bill is going to be. It's a study bill to do research. We're going to try to get the state of California to agree to fund the California School for the Blind to do research in our visually impaired population of kids throughout the state, what ECC services they're getting, and what is the status of the service providers who are available to provide that. So we want to document that there is an unmet need that needs to be addressed, and that research we hope to use for further legislation for ECC mandate.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jay, could I ask you guys what we'll do with this recording is put it up on the OMSA Live Binder site intact, But since you only used part of your PowerPoint and you have a lot of resource slides, could I ask you to send that to us separately so that we can, if you're willing to make that accessible to other people, especially the resource slides, I suppose. I don't know what else your PowerPoint has.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yes, and we can put it in order with detail.
That'd be nice.
We would love to have it widely distributed and available to anybody, except, gosh, you know,
Should we take your name off?
yeah, take my name off of that.
Okay, right, yeah, we'll send it to you. for
I just
upload.
I don't want to be blacklisted throughout the country.
know, That's such an important point, because part of the reason this problem exists is that, when you start raising complaints to your, you try your educative approach, and in the cases where that works, it's great. But when it doesn't work and you're still not able to provide the service, then anything else you do is not perceived very positively by your administration. And that's a tough place to be in.
Right. So I have a question for people who are attending. I know that we're talking to people throughout the country. I'm wondering if y'all have been experiencing similar issues to us, the issues that we've addressed with limitations on community-based O&M, limitations on instruction before after school hours, and in the home.
Can I suggest, since we have a fairly large group, that we use the raise hands feature here, which
Yeah,
is
fine.
over in reactions, I think.
Okay.
The menu at the bottom. Donna's got a question. Donna, go ahead.
Well, it's not a question, but an answer to your question. I'm not sure lately, but this has been such an ongoing problem
Yeah.
for so long. And when I was chair of the O&M division, we were addressing this. This was much more than 20 years ago. And here in my county, Anne Arundel County in Maryland, there were many years that the instructors could not take them off of campus. And it's just, so what you've done, I hear you with the frustration, and I'm so impressed with what you've accomplished. And I like to see this in other places. I don't know if that answers your question as to what is happening now, but I can tell you it has been an ongoing problem. That's why we wrote that position paper.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, we got Keith. You're up.
Yeah, I'm retired now, but this was back when I started teaching in '86. I pretty much had a lot of freedom to take kids out in my car for O&M instruction. But then around 2000, things started to change. And then there were some districts that would allow you to take them off school property if you used their van. But it required a lot of extra effort on my part. I had to get there early in the morning to pick up their van and sign it out. And then I had to bring it back and then get in my car and continue with the rest of my itinerant schedule for that day.
Right.
And then finally, as what time went on, they just said, no, don't take the kid off school property. You just find something on campus to do. And they weren't interested in any sort of rationale or what's best for the student. They were giving you an order and you had to obey, or they're going to call your supervisor up at the intermediate unit and, make trouble for you. And so, in Pennsylvania, we have intermediate units that provide services to the 501 school district. So it was pretty nasty. And, children were really being shortchanged, not given, the off-campus opportunities that they needed. And so, yeah, it's bad here in Pennsylvania from my experience.
Thanks, Keith. Melanie, you had your hand up I don't know if you took it down on purpose or accidentally, but you did.
This is Melanie. I just raised it because we had similar issues in Montana. And of course, Montana is compounded by vast distances to even get to a town where there's a street light. So yeah, it's ongoing here. Thank you.
So Melanie, no resolution to the problems you're having?
When I was working in schools, I really just sort of tried to tackle it in relation to each student. And in Helena, which is the capital of Montana, I had a middle schooler who did not have age appropriate travel skills. And that's often the language I used. You know, okay, she's 14. So what are other 14-year-olds doing? And I would bring that forward. But in that case, they did allow me to transport in my own vehicle, and I could take her to other school
call you back.
district buildings and do O&M. And some community based. So I handled it individually for each student. And the timing, as you addressed, was very difficult.
Yeah.
In trying to provide more relevant instruction, and administrators, special ed directors simply not acknowledging that students who were the same age were traveling under different lighting conditions. So it's an ongoing battle here, I would say.
I think the legal reference to the IDEA is your most powerful tool, because the thing, whether or not people don't care about best practices, they care about adequate practices under the law. So if you could show them that they're not providing adequate practices under the law, then, and that they could get sued for that, then that would be a concern for them. Of course, that's not how you would present it. You know, it's sort of like, well, yes, I'm willing to do whatever you want me to do. I just want you to be aware of this law, and I'll send it to you.
You know, I wanted to comment on what Melanie said when you said that, you know, you had to point out that a student didn't have age appropriate travel skills. And that's very much in line with the educative approach that William Kohler was talking about. And I thought, okay, that's definitely another area of resources that we can support. And he's actually at the end of our PowerPoint, I listed a presentation he's doing at the International Online O&M Symposium in January, where he's going to talk about results from a Delphi study that, you know, really developed a framework for age appropriate skills that kids with visual impairments should have in O&M. And that language is the language that some administrators hear, like if you can talk about teaching standards and linking it to that. So and it was just interesting to hear you say that language kind of worked for you. And I think that that's an area where we could be even more educative. So.
I'd just like to point out in relation to that the last Mobility Monday we had was Bill talking about this issue. And we recorded that one as well. And it is available to anyone who would like to see it on the US OMSA website. Under resources, there's a listing for an OMSA live binder of Mobility Monday. So if you'd like to reference that directly, you can just go there and look that up. So USO, I'll put it in the chat. But so Keith, you're up again.
Thank you.
Just a general question. Hasn't the United States Supreme Court said in their rulings that school districts are only required to provide minimum compliance when it comes to special needs students? Now, they don't use those exact words, but that's what I'm told is the bottom line on their rulings. I'm kind of confused when I hear things like that.
That's changed.
Oh, has it?
Yes, but what you're talking about is a basic floor of educational opportunity, and that held until ruling in, I want to say 2017 with Garrett Frey. And now the federal government says, you know, the ruling basically said, no, students with special needs are expected to have, this is not going to be the right wording, but challenging goals, you know, reasonably appropriately challenging goals, and they should be making reasonably substantial growth. So you're right, Keith, for up until like this, that Supreme Court case with Garrett
It's called the
Frey.
Andrew decision. That's called the Andrew decision.
Oh, Andrew F. Yes, sorry, I'm talking about Garrett Frey. You are 100%. Yes, Andrew F. Sorry, Garrett Frey's completely different.
Yeah.
So, but yes, up until the Andrew F. decision, that's all we were expected to provide was this basic floor of educational opportunity, which was really, you know, the bare minimum.
Could I provide a resource? Todd Reeves, who's the president of the Overbrook School for the Blind in Philadelphia, he's an expert when it comes to Supreme Court decisions and special ed legislation. If you want to talk to somebody, I mean, he'll talk to you eventually. You just got to be persistent, but he's a great resource in that area. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Great to
Todd
know.
Reeves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
What was that name, Keith?
Todd Reeves,
Todd Reeves. Thank
he's
you.
the president of the Overbrook School for the Blind in Philadelphia.
Great. I see the name Fozzie that is vaguely familiar to me.
Hello, I'm sorry I jumped in so late.
Oh. Good to have you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion? Anything else you guys would like to say? This has been fantastic. I think you've inspired a lot of people here with the an option to what has seemed insurmountable as a problem from what I see within the field. I mean, I've just been watching this grow forever.
I think if any of you want to do this in your state, we'd be happy to talk to you. Just contact us. Our contact information is on the first page of the presentation.
And which will be up on the OMSA website sometime soon. Nick writes. Oh, there's Nick sent in his email address, which is great. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I know you reach Jay, you reach me. I know you reach Brenda, you reach me, and we keep each other in the loop.
All right. Eileen Silverman, anything else you'd like to throw in here at this point?
Well, this is really interesting. You know, as a graduate of Cal State, I always felt that California led the way, and not only in legislation. Yeah, I need to get one of those, Brenda. But also in recognizing the importance of having membership organizations for O&M specialists. And CAMS was started in the 60s, even before I got into the field, only by a few years. And I think it's important that we continue to support the National Association of Orientation Mobility Specialists by becoming members of OMSA. And if OMSA can play a role with working with individual agencies or organizations or mobility specialists, that's what our role is. And that's what we want to do to promote those services for O&M. So I appreciate again the leadership from California. You took even the lead on IDEA, if you know your history, that California was ahead of that. And we look for more information with this new endeavor that you're trying. So thank you, guys. Good seeing you all too.
Thank you.
Brenda and I go way back.
Yes, a little bit.
Thanks, everybody, for your time and interest.
Thank you, all three of you. Fantastic. It's great to have had this conversation. Thank you.
This was fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks, Lucas.
Alrighty.
Yeah, good. Thanks for having us. We're happy to get the word out any way we can. And maybe well, I think this PowerPoint lists a lot of our key resources. And if that's available on OMSA, I think that's going to be really good.
Yeah, if you just send it to Lucas, I'm sure he'll put it up.
Good. Yeah, we will definitely do that. And yeah, I think that that's going to be really helpful because we need to update our KOMS website again. We had it there for a while and we need to update it, but I think having it on a national organization site is even better.
You have my
Yeah,
email.
and if we could really find out which states might be able to initiate some type of organizational committee like you have done, then we could really help and support them in doing that. So we possibly could get some word out to individual states. If Texas is ahead of the curve, they're usually one that already has moved ahead. But I'm thinking like places like Michigan and Wisconsin or even Illinois, Illinois has their Association of Orientation Mobility Specialists also that